Our guest today is an author of a new book called Soberful and co-host of a popular podcast also called Soberful, Veronica Valli. Veronica is a psychotherapist who coaches sustainable sobriety for processing uncomfortable emotions that we're all trying to numb, sometimes through alcohol. So Veronica, thank you for being here and congratulations on the success of your podcast and the release of this new book. That's really awesome.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with you.
Nice. Yeah, actually, the pleasure is all ours. And first thing I really want to actually say is that your acknowledgement section was really unique. I'm not sure if I've ever come across an acknowledgement section where you literally like listed out a name and then a sentence or two about them. I thought that was a really unique touch in how you wrote this entire book, by the way. Just want to
Oh, really? I feel like I've maybe read acknowledgements like that before, but yeah, I have so many great people around me. I wanted to make sure I included them, but yeah, there's some personal messages in there.
Yeah, I thought that was awesome. And maybe I need to read more. I don't know. But before we get into your book a little bit more specifically, definitely wanted to get to know you a little bit more. Jay and I are pretty curious on this. So if you don't mind telling us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, what life was like at that time for you, and then a few of the key pit stops or moments maybe along the way that have helped you get to where you are today.
Well, thank you. So, obviously, from my accent, I'm British. I grew up in the UK. I'm Gen X, like to my bone. I've seen a couple of definitions of Generation X, and one of them was that we were raised with benign neglect, and that's like so true. Like, we were the generation that just like in the holidays, off you go and you just come back when you're hungry kind of thing. And it was so easy to drink. Like I was getting into bars and nightclubs when I was 14 years old. In England, our drinking age is only 18. And back then, like nobody asked for ID. You just had to look old enough. And as a girl, with makeup and high heels, you can look old enough. So I was going out and drinking in really adult situations as a child. And also, I mentioned Gen X because I'm also of that generation that in the 90s, it was really presented to us that drinking and drinking like the boys was feminist. So holding your own in the bar, like that rowdy kind of drinking, that really came from my generation. Like we really kind of took that and ran with it, and we thought that was a feminist message, and it's not. It's women cannot drink the same as men because we're physically not able to. Right. And so I grew up as I'm an only child of a single parent, of a mother who has undiagnosed mental health problems. I left home at 16 to escape and was fending for myself. Managed to kind of get through, finish college and school, and was just I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin like as long as I can remember. I was in a very difficult home situation. I felt deeply uncomfortable with who I was. I had lots of feelings and emotions I had no help or guidance or role modeling to deal with. So when I drank alcohol, it was a light bulb going on for me. It was just the solution. It just fixed all of that. Right. So I had a very, it was pretty, I got sober at 27. I had a great time drinking for maybe 3 years, from 15 to 18, before it was even legal. There was always a cost. I remember being in a pub in England, the town I grew up in, and going into blackout and waking up outside literally in the gutter, covered in my own vomit, with the landlord throwing a bucket of water over me. And I remember thinking really clearly, there's something wrong with this. This isn't right.
Yeah.
But everyone around me, and this is what I mean about this Gen X culture, everybody around me went, oh my God, that was an amazing night. You are so crazy. You are so fun. You are so wild. You are a party animal. So this messaging, and I just went, oh. And my brain like took that and filed it away under fun, crazy, party girl. So whenever I was like, I want to have fun, my brain goes, this is what you do. Like the conditioning from my culture that was a good night out was really quite overwhelming.
Yeah. That's really confusing. I mean,
Mm-hmm,
you're getting validation from the outside world. Meanwhile, your internal world is feeling disconnected and like you're
mm-hmm.
floating around. And so that's tough.
Yeah, and I was disconnected from myself anyway. Like I didn't like myself at all. Um, and I needed alcohol, but I was a binge drinker. I'm highly allergic to it. I mean, I'm really sick the next day. And then at 18, I was also messing around with lots of drugs. You know, back then it was hallucinogens, LSD, speed. And I had a bad trip one night and I went into drug-induced psychosis
Hmm.
that I didn't know at the time, and I thought I was suicidal. Had auditory hallucinations. I had panic attacks. It was absolute sheer hell. And I would many times thought about killing myself. Like I would stand in front of the bus stop to go to college, and will myself to just go in front of it. But I, like most people with the problem, I didn't want to die. I just didn't know how to live. And that kind of accelerated my drinking from like, I would, drink when I went out to very quickly. And this is very common. I realized this after I got sober and I started working in this area. Universally, everyone who has an alcohol problem usually has anxiety because that's just what the chemical will do. But then you use alcohol to cope with the anxiety. So
Right.
I was having panic attacks. I was prescribed stuff, Valium, all that kind of stuff. And I would use alcohol to then cope. That's when I began secret drinking and drinking alcohol before social situations and all that kind of stuff. And I was, it was on the outside, I probably looked okay. Like I definitely looked a bit like chaotic and a bit like crazy party girl, but I've never been fired from a job ever. I've never had a DUI. I've never been arrested. On the outside, I looked kind of fairly normal for someone in their early 20s, but on the inside, I was dying.
That is the tough thing about alcohol. I think if you were to look at something like heroin, if someone were to be using heroin, it's so far outside of the realm of what's socially acceptable. I think it'd be easy to maybe convince them that there's a problem with using it. But, alcohol is so pervasive. There's an ad on every street corner. The bars are packed every weekend. Here, there's a huge culture around binge drinking in college. I think, especially for young people, with alcohol being so ubiquitous, it's much harder to convince someone that there might be a problem with their use, or just convince yourself that there's a problem with your use of alcohol, even when it's becoming dysfunctional.
Yeah, we've normalized abnormal drinking. And that was, that was the message that was given to me when I was lying in the gutter covered in my own vomit. That's not normal, but it was normalized for me. And we do that in our culture at every level. You probably had those experiences too growing up where it's alcohol abuse is normalized. And it's the difference between, heroin is illegal and bad and alcohol is legal. And as long as you're not homeless, like that's basically the distinction in people's heads. Like homeless people, they clearly have a drink problem. But if you have somewhere to live and a car and a job, you can't possibly have a problem with alcohol.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, I want to actually get into your book a little bit and maybe start with something that was written in your foreword by Chip Summers, who is not only the co-host of your podcast, but a person you interned for at one point in your career. And he's actually the first person you talk about in your acknowledgement section. So going back to the acknowledgement section. And he's also a person who's famously known for helping Russell Brand live his sober life. But I want to read something that he wrote that I thought was powerful, just in terms of like setting the expectations and the foundation of this conversation. So he writes, there are a lot of books in the genre of quit lit. There are even more people working in the field of self-help and personal growth. He then goes on to write about how, various styles and methodologies and different types of people can come and go with their, way of healing, but that's just going to be coming and going. He mentions that there are two things that are consistent. First, there are many people out there who are struggling to know how to deal with the developing alcohol problem. And the second constant is the most successful help and support comes from people who understand, empathize, and give clear, non-judgmental support and encouragement. People who can get to the heart of an issue quickly, simply, and in a way that demonstrates a genuine desire to see people reach their full potential. I think that's so important because people need to be reminded that there are other people in the world that are at different stages of their journey. And every single day, new people are beginning to struggle with something that you might already be a few years into struggling with, or a few years removed since struggling with it. So it's just a reminder that people are at different points of their journey, and sometimes they're at the beginning of this painful journey. So I thought that was really important. And then add to that, like, people continue to drink. And I think it's important that we understand how to have more caring conversations with these folks to, so we can help them if they ever need it. So I really thought that was a powerful piece of the foreword that kind of sets how, like, we can continue to talk about this. It's just not another self-help conversation. And there's a lot of power behind that.
Thank you. Chip's been a great friend and mentor and support for like nearly my whole sobriety. What I really wanted to do with this book and my message is we have a deeply, deeply ingrained belief in our culture that alcohol equals fun. So therefore, by default, sobriety must equal boring. Mm. And we don't really question that. We just think that just is, right? We know that to be true. We don't question it. And I believe that. I was like 100% signed up to that belief. And none of those things are true. All this stuff we need to kind of re-examine. And what I wanted to present in this book, and what Chip and our message is that, like, I've been sober for 21 and a half years. If it wasn't fun, I'd have been drunk 20 years ago. Yeah. Like, if it wasn't if it wasn't all the things, I'd be drinking. Mm-hmm. But we have deeply, deeply held misconceptions about sobriety and what alcohol brings us. And my life's work is to challenge that and present sobriety as something to aspire to. It's like, and I'm sure we'll go into this more in the conversation, but for me, sobriety is the edge. Like, it is an advantage. You get an edge over other people. It's true. It brings way more than alcohol does. I mean, you get to a point where, like, if I'm in a situation and someone offers me a drink, I'd be like, why would I want to, like, ruin this? Yeah. Like, why would, like, alcohol makes my life smaller, and sobriety makes it expansive.
Love that. And think about it in the context of a work week. It's very common to go out on a Thursday night with some friends or coworkers, and next thing you know, your Friday is really rough, and that's 20% of your work week. If Monday to Friday is 100% of your work week, each day is 20%. Think about it like that. You might think differently about having that extra drink.
Well, that was me. Yeah, I would go out on a Thursday night and then just kind of make it through Friday, and then just drink through the weekend, party through the weekend, and then Monday be useless, Tuesday be kind of all right, Wednesday, like, my best time was Thursday morning. Like, I'd be like feeling great, and then do it all over again. But here's the thing. It's when we have an alcohol problem. And this is how I define a problem, because lots of people drink and it's a non-issue. Let me explain that first. So if you think about alcohol in the same way that I think about sandwiches, then you don't have an issue. And, like, I might have a sandwich for lunch today and think, enjoy that. And tomorrow I'll think I'll have soup. And then the next day I'll have salad. And then at the weekend, I'm at a party and a plate of sandwiches goes by and I think, oh, I'll have a couple of those. And then it goes by later and I'm like, no, I'm good. That's literally as much thought as I give to sandwiches. Like, sandwiches rent no space in my head. That's my husband has the occasional drink. That's how he thinks about alcohol, the same way I think about sandwiches. We know we have a problem when we start obsessing about sandwiches. Should I have a sandwich? People know if I have a sandwich. What are people thinking about how many sandwiches I eat? Maybe I should cut out sandwiches in January. It's we rent space in our head. And this is kind of the critical message I want to get through. People with a problem with alcohol, they do 4 things. They drink, they think about drinking, they think about not drinking, and they recover from drinking. And that takes bandwidth. So that takes energy, and it takes space in our head to have that, like, oh, maybe I should, do people think I drink too much? Maybe I won't have wine tonight, or maybe just one is okay. That pointless spending of energy eats away at our bandwidth. Now, maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 40%. You can do a lot. For me, it was like at least 40, 50%, but I still got a college degree during that time. I traveled all over the world in that time. I held down jobs with responsibility in that time. So you can do a lot when your bandwidth is compromised. So on the outside, that's why things look okay. But what you cannot do is emotionally grow into the person that you are meant to be, because you don't have access to the bandwidth. And that's what I mean about the edge. That's why when you get sober, you get full access to your bandwidth, because you're not having pointless arguments with yourself or full of shame or regret or whatever. That bandwidth, imagine what you could do with that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, then maybe that would be a good opportunity to talk about how some of your relationships in life change as a result of leaving behind alcohol, or maybe just the relationships that you've cultivated since leaving behind alcohol, how it may have been impossible to even have brought those into your life had you been drinking.
Well, your relationships do change when you stop drinking. The first thing that happens is other people do take your sobriety personally. And that's because, if like me, we tend to drink with people who drink like we do, right? That's, and if you are saying, I'm not drinking anymore, doesn't agree with me, don't really like what happens, I'm giving it up. Well, what does that say about my drinking? Because I drink like you do. So what does that say about me? And therefore people take it very personally. And what a lot of people find is the people around us you'll get a lot of people who try and persuade you that you don't have a problem, you don't need to stop, you just need to do this or that or cut down or whatever. It's a really good way to find out who your friends really are. So there's that change. And that's what happened to me. My real friends were like, we support you, that's great, shall we go to see a movie instead on Friday or whatever? And that's really, really important. But the big thing is, when I was drinking, and I'm not during my drinking career, and I didn't drink every day because it was so toxic for me. But during that entire period of my life, I wasn't my authentic self.
Right.
Not just, and I don't mean just when I was drunk. I certainly did and said things I regretted and was ashamed about. But it was actually also in between. I was so full of fear and self-loathing, and I still didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. My behavior was not a true representation of my authentic self. And that just kind of compounds the problem. When you feel bad about yourself, your brain looks for a way to take away the bad feelings, and alcohol is a very quick way of doing that. So it's not that your relationships change. First of all, your relationship with yourself changes because you reconnect with who you really are. And it's a journey back to yourself. And that has a ripple effect on every relationship that you have from then on.
Absolutely. And just to take that one step further, I mean, you think about the people who may not want to actually see you sober. It actually might turn out to be your friends and family. Like, yes, there might be friends and family that support you, but at the end of the day, as you were kind of alluding to, they might take it personally. And so it's just interesting to think about, like, if you're spending your weekends, with your sister or brother and having a drink, every time you guys meet up, and then all of a sudden one day you're just like, you know what, I'm choosing to move my life in a different direction. Well, that may be a tougher conversation and a different dynamic to navigate than you might initially believe. And so just having a strategy in place, as you talk about in the book, having a plan, just realize this might be coming, understand how to navigate that conversation. Like, don't take the bait where they're going to try to talk you into it, because that's just them projecting their own feelings about drinking and kind of covering up like the fact that it's okay because they're doing it. So there's just different ways to handle that situation that could be a little bit more difficult than you might initially believe.
Yeah, and you know, sadly, that's one of the hardest things to deal with some of my clients is that when they come from families where what they do together is drink. And, you know, it's the parents have always drank, and there's cocktail hour, or there's, you know, sport, and their social interactions are all around alcohol. And it's much harder when it's your family than it is your peer group, I think. And I've had lots of people have to navigate that. I mean, I give some tips and advice in the book about how to navigate that. But it's really because we all need to belong. We all need to feel that we connect with people. So we're stopping drinking, but it also seems like we're severing those belonging kind of threads. And that's really, really hard. And, you know, I will say what I've seen with people is eventually everyone gets used to it and it's fine. Yeah. But initially it's rocky. I mean, it really is. And that's why I always encourage anybody who's deciding to stop drinking to seek out like-minded community. It's really that, I mean, it was essential for me when I got sober. I went to AA because that's all there was in, 2 decades ago. There wasn't any, the internet was not even a thing, hardly. And I didn't have anyone. I had no support and no money. And I needed people who understood what I was going through. And, there's lots of different options now, online and in person. And we need to have that community to help us get through that sort of bumpy first few months where we are re-navigating the world and everyone in it.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned peer group and you mentioned like-minded people. I have to ask you, what is up with the mommy needs wine culture?
Oh my
Can you
God.
talk about what it showcases and what it reveals?
It's such, yeah, thank you. Are either of you guys parents? Not yet.
No.
Not yet. Not yet. It's very specific to women, and it's such a disservice to women because there's the whole kind of mommy needs wine where it's completely advocated that it's okay for mothers to drink, but not too much. If you cross that invisible line and are a drunk mummy, then you are quite possibly the worst type of human being in the world. There's nothing, no one is judged harder than a drunk mother. A drunk Black mother is probably, right? That's where, so this whole, it's marketing, it's market expansion. That's what it is. It's, and this is this is what drives me crazy. We are sold perceived benefits to drinking alcohol. You will relax, you'll have fun, you'll connect, you'll reward yourself because you deserve it because you work damn hard. Now, I want to say we can receive those things from alcohol. That's true. I definitely, in the early stages of my drinking, had real fun and connection, etc., etc. But what nobody mentions is there is always a cost, always. Right from the beginning, there was a cost. Now, when I was 16, I couldn't care less, but there's always a cost, but nobody ever talks about that. So the whole mommy needs wine thing is really sold, and it's deceptive because the cost bit is not mentioned. I think that there's something culturally here. Parenting is really hard. Parenting in America is really, really hard. It's literally all of your policies are like anti-family and anti-woman. If you look at how other cultures, just going off it on a side, there is a great book when you become parents that you're going to have to read called hunt-gather parent. And it's fascinating because it's written by, I think she's a sociologist or something like that. And she said, basically, all of our research into parenting has been done on white Europeans. And we've made that normal. Like it's the benchmark. Whereas actually, when we look at other cultures, how white Europeans parent is actually bizarre. And she looked at indigenous cultures all over the world about how their kids are way more helpful and smarter and calmer and blah, blah, blah. And because the research just hasn't looked at that. And anyway, it's just really fascinating. So my point is, I think what's under this whole mummy needs wine memes and marketing everywhere is this just rage at how hard and awful it is being a parent in European, Western European culture. There's barely any parental leave. There's no support. It's incredibly lonely and exhausting. Why? I mean, I don't blame women for the local moms going, Friday night, we're having a couple of glasses, bring your kids over or whatever. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that in itself. It's that it's sold as this is the solution. And I wrote a blog post about this a while ago. There was a Canadian group, and they're still about, that they did this whole, they're millennial mothers, which is the whole millennial mothers. We're way cooler than the ones who came before us. They've reinvented motherhood, and they do day drinking. So they do play dates with day drinking because happy mummy, happy baby. Right. And it's presented as this really acceptable white middle class kind of lovely wine bar. Here are our kids. We're having a glass or two. What's the problem? Now, for me, what I feel what's really being communicated is nobody told these poor millennial mothers that that you can't have it all. Sorry, that was a lie. Your career's going to go down the toilet. You are going to be responsible for more of the childcare and domestic responsibilities than anyone led you to believe. It's really freaking lonely and exhausting. And that whole thing falls apart. What happened was they hit the headlines. They did a day drinking festival. They did a festival of day drinking with all these different lovely wine tasting, all this kind of with bring your babies. I mean, none of it made sense. But the founders, and they were very presentable, really white and middle class, excuse me, what's the problem? And I'm like, I don't know, put a tent and put a bunch of black women in there with some alcohol. What do you think everyone's going to say?
Right. That's a great point.
Right? What do you think? You think people are going to go, oh, that's nice, those mummies getting together and having some social time and connection? People are going to look at that and report it in an instance. And that's where that whole thing falls down. There's a lot of white privilege in that message.
Yeah, and if it wasn't wine, if it was another kind of alcohol, if it was,
tequila,
whiskey, tequila, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
The other interesting aspect of all of that is something you allude to is in our film and TV shows, they'll show a scene where, a couple is up late night or a bunch of friends are up late night and it's, 1 o'clock in the morning, and the next scene, and they're drinking, by the way. And then the next scene flashes to them all being ready first thing in the morning, like getting the kids out to school or on their way to work, as if a hangover isn't part of their life, or the fact that they're running on 3 hours of sleep, or the fact that they literally don't know how to put their shoes on. I mean, that's all skipped over. And the more you see that and the more you're exposed to it, it's just kind of part of all of the dishonesty that goes around drinking and how it's advertised and marketed to us.
I'm so impressed how well you've researched this. Yes, that's the big lie that we're sold. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I want to say, I'm not, alcohol has its place in our culture, and we've tried, prohibition, that doesn't work. What my argument is I don't, drink by all means, get drunk by all means, binge drink every day by all means. I have no problem with that. It's the lie that is spun around that I have the problem with. Do not tell me that is, I've had, this has happened to me where when I was younger in my 20s or 30s, I've been at a party and someone figures out I don't drink and they're drunk and they come over and they're like, oh my God, like you don't drink. And I'm like, and I just let them ramble on. I look at them and think, oh my God, like, thank God I'm not you. Because you don't look like you're having fun and you make no sense and you're embarrassing yourself. Yeah. So it's the lie, it's the dishonest narrative around alcohol that I have my quarrel with, and that what I wish to change the conversation about. You know, I do a cost benefit analysis with my clients when they come to me. So we really look at the cost of what alcohol costs them. We look at money, and it's not just money they spend on alcohol, it's associated costs like getting takeout food and Ubers and missed days at work and missed opportunities. That healthcare, you know, how it affects your health. Those are lots of hidden costs. Then we look at time. How much time do you spend thinking about drinking when you could be thinking about way more interesting things, recovering from drinking, all of that kind of stuff. For me, my recovery from drinking was way longer than the actual drinking. Like it was treble the amount of time.
Yeah.
And then we look at like impacts on your relationships, on your parenting. Then the big ones are how it affects your dignity, your authenticity, your integrity. That's the cost of your drinking. And it's never going to, there will always be a cost, and the cost always increases. And I'm like, if you're okay with the cost, crack on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if the cost is okay with you, crack on. But don't deceive yourself that this is not the cost. This is always going to be the cost, and it will always increase.
Yeah. And going back to something that you said earlier about this misconception that you can only have fun with alcohol, I think part of the way that we as a culture deceive ourselves is thinking that something is really fun when it really isn't. Like one of the litmus tests I've been kind of trying to run by myself recently is thinking about if an activity would be fun if I was doing it sober. You know, going for a hike, playing guitar, playing golf, playing fetch with your dog, all those things you really don't need to be drunk to enjoy. But, you know, standing in a crowded bar with a bunch of young people who are shouting at each other over loud music, you kind of need to be drunk just to tolerate that. And that makes you ask yourself the question, like, how fun is it really if I wouldn't be enjoying it if I wasn't consuming alcohol? And I think that's just kind of an interesting test because, you know, the greatest things in life, I think, are enjoyable whether there's alcohol involved or not.
Yeah. And that's a big eye opener. Is like, I, you know, when I stopped drinking at 27, my whole social life was around alcohol and bars and nightclubs. And I couldn't perceive that there could be anything better than that. Like I thought that was the best time ever. And I also thought that everyone drank the same way I did. Like I didn't conceive that people just didn't drink because they just didn't drink or drank very rarely. So that was a massive kind of revelation to me, that like all the things I began to do that were just so incredible. And socializing, you know, when I was 28 and I'd been sober a year, I wanted to go dancing and flirt with boys and go to gigs and all those kind of things. And that I was able to do all of that sober. And I discovered those experiences were all better. Like that was a big thing, like going out and like partying, going to festivals. I'm almost 50 now, but I tell people like, you know, when I was young, I did all the things. I've done it all. Festivals, gigs, parties, weddings, all of the event, everything that you want to do when you're younger, right? And they were all better sober. Like I look back and think, oh my God, I'm like, what was I thinking? It's, you know, I've been to so many, I love live music. I've been to so many concerts with people and they drink and they miss their favorite song. They're always at the bar or the bathroom. They're sort of in their own little sort of bubbles, you know, they're not, I'm like, you just spent like $200 like for what? Like this is like a once in a lifetime band and you missed most of it.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
But we've been sold that, right? We've been sold, like go and see your favorite band, get a buzz on, will make that experience even better.
Right. It's a multiplier. Yeah.
When it's really a subtractor.
Yeah, it is.
Talking mathematics over here.
Yeah, it is. It's true.
That's interesting because I mean that kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that most folks might be drinking, or not most, some folks might be drinking just straight out of boredom and not realizing that they have this power within themselves to really manipulate how they're experiencing time. And, you know, if you can fill your lifespan with as many memorable moments and be present for them, you're going to feel like time lasts forever. You're going to feel like you have all the time in the world, and you're going to feel like you've actually lived a fulfilled existence. And so, you know, just thinking about the events that are happening in your day or week and year, and making those as memorable as possible, and really feeling like you have a long life, as opposed to like being blurred through half of that.
Yeah, it's all this stuff kind of, I didn't realize it until I got sober. What I want people to know is that when we have an alcohol problem, and you mentioned boredom, that's been a big thing through the pandemic, is you know, people we've seen a massive rise in drinking. A lot of that's boredom, and we, you know, that's something we have to work on. What happens is alcohol and drinking becomes the main event. You know, we work, we pay our bills, but kind of like this, that's how my life was. Like, I lived for the weekends. Like, that was the main event. I thought this kind of crazy party girl thing I did, like, that was like the best life could get. It was the main event. And it really wasn't. And when we are spending our bandwidth with alcohol, we miss the main event. And the main event is your purpose here, what you're here to do. And I don't like, it's different for everybody, but I'll tell you what it is for everyone. Your purpose is to be your authentic self. And there is no buzz better than that. When you become fully connected to yourself, there's no artificial substance that can match the level of that high and that buzz. And that is the main event.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Veronica, was ties back into that comment you made earlier around how people with alcohol problems will spend their time doing one of four things. Like, they'll either spend their time drinking, thinking about not drinking, or recovering from drinking. I think a lot of people may think of going completely sober as dedicating their life to thinking about not drinking. Like, they assume that once alcohol goes away, then their whole life will just become a struggle to avoid it. What thoughts or insights can you give to those people after 20 years of sobriety?
You know, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that. So in the beginning, we're definitely doing that. In the first few months, we're definitely doing that, because it's such a massive lifestyle change and habit change. And I always tell people it's really important to know that early sobriety, and I'm talking roughly the first year-ish, is not how it is long term. It just isn't how it is long term. So the book that we're talking about, I wrote a program that's the 5 pillars of sobriety, and it's not that, it's personal development. So every human being on the planet has to do personal development. We all have to work to really know ourselves, to really reveal ourselves to ourselves. We all of us have to do work to free us from issues from the past, because we all have stuff. So every human being has to do this, but most people don't realize this. Most people sort of bumble through life. You know, some people grew up parented in a way that they got some really helpful tools. A lot of us didn't. So when you have an alcohol problem, you get this amazing gift where you are called through necessity to have to do some deeper work on yourself. So the focus is on personal growth, not on staying away from drinking. So as a consequence of this personal growth work that I do, that has so many different layers of rewards, that improved like my career, improved my relationships, like improved my self-esteem, as a consequence of that, the alcohol problem got taken care of. So the worst thing you can do is just stop drinking, and that's it. I've known people who do that. It doesn't look like fun. They get very crispy. So that's why we have to have a program of some kind. It's structure, and all of the programs out there, including mine, the 12 steps, refuge recovery, which is based on Buddhist principles, women for sobriety, which is based on their 13 statements. There's there's tons of different programs out there. They're all personal development. And if you look at them, they don't really mention alcohol a whole lot. Like maybe the 12 steps are the most well known. I think alcohol is only mentioned in the first one. The rest of them are a spiritual program for personal development. And all of the programs out there are the same. So that's why we have to, in some ways, I suppose, replace alcohol with something else. But it's so much more than that. It's, I just look back and think, gosh, I feel so lucky through the work that I did on myself. And now I'm a mother of 2 boys. I kind of think about, I want my kids to do this work, but I don't want them to have to go through the experience I went through to get to the point to do this work. And I don't think that that's necessarily has to be the case. I've seen that in other people who have a kid, like Chip's son, for example, that you can still, once you understand this is the work, doesn't matter what's going on, this is the work that you have to do. And it's presented in a way that's engaging. That is the richness of life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Follow that along. And to add to that, I think especially early on, when you do some of this deep work on yourself and you start to get into your shadows, you also start to figure out how to put boundaries up for yourself. And that is something that could be challenging. I know it was for me at first. I mean, I'm not the best at saying no, but just thinking through this, when you create boundaries, you create that balance that you're really looking for. And as you quote in the book, you quote Brene Brown, and she talks about setting boundaries means being clear on what is okay and what is not okay. And so, you say what you mean what you say, but you can say it without being mean. I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And just realize that the person who's in control of the other person's feelings is the other person. We're not really responsible for how that other person may react to us making a life decision for ourselves. So again, if anyone is thinking about creating boundaries and saying no, these are some things that might be helpful.
Yeah. If you do one thing and you only work on having really good boundaries, I guarantee you it will revolutionize your life. Like revolution. And most people I meet are pretty bad at boundaries. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to have them. And again, that's something that we really should have learned as children. It's something I'm trying to role model to my kids because I have boundaries of steel now, but, and to teach them how to have boundaries and ask for their needs to be met. And once I got sober and someone helped me with that and I practiced it and I saw how differently I felt when I had boundaries and I was able to say no and all of those things, it was like, oh my God, the liberation. I mean, I thought I was responsible for other people's feelings. And I also was really, I was very concerned about you liking me. And so I would be out of integrity a lot because I just wanted you to like me. So I'd do the thing or agree with you because then I thought you'd approve and like of me. But then what happens is I don't like myself.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It's not very sustainable.
So that is a vital skill. The things that will, again, this is true for everybody, not just people with an alcohol problem. The key things you need to know how to do, how to have boundaries, and that's in the book, specifically how to do it, how to have boundaries, how to change your limiting beliefs, because we all have limiting beliefs, which is the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And those all come from childhood. How to deal with resentments. Those are skills that you can learn at any time, and they're very specific skills. And when you learn them, your life will change in ways you can't even imagine.
And were those kind of reverse engineered from the themes you found working with your clients? Like, were there themes of people with problems with alcohol don't have boundaries, they have limiting beliefs, and they have resentments? Were those kind of the 3 things that kept coming up?
Yeah, 100%. And resentments, you can see this everywhere. All of our problems in the world are because of resentments. And all a resentment is you're not being the way that I want you to be.
Hmm.
And that's all a resentment. Let me tell you the story about what this asshole did. Like, can you believe this? Like, did that? And what happens is we just stay there. We don't go beyond there. And what happens with that belief system is, for me to be okay, I need that asshole to realize that he did wrong and come and apologize. Now, I can't live being dependent on what someone else may or may not do. I have to get free. I have to have the power to be free. Whether you apologize, whether you realize your mistake. And also the thing about resentments, a lot of it is perception rather than actual reality. So once you have the power to be free of that, and Wayne Dyer talks about this, to eventually be free of the good and bad opinion of other people, there is infinite liberation in that. So yeah, from my personal experience and from the work that I've done, it's like, these are the core things that if you work on them, will change your life. And for me, like when someone told me that, I'm like, specifically tell me how to do that. Like step 1, step 2, like I get that I have to have boundaries, but I need to know exactly how that is. And that's what I try and lay out in the book, is like specifically how to do that. But and again, this is true for everybody, not just someone with an alcohol problem.
Yeah, you've mentioned the word liberation and free several times. One component of the book that really resonated with me was this idea of unlocking vulnerability. To me, I mean, it's just one of the best parts of actually being on this podcast journey. The fact that, I've had to look at so many different things from numerous angles, including, and I think most importantly, myself, like a lot of self-reflection, a lot of like who I am, what am I doing, what matters to me, where do I want to put my savage mode energy, what am I interested in building, and then also where have I been lacking, where could I be better, like got into some of that shadow work. But I feel like it was so important because when you start to get vulnerable, you start to turn into more of your authentic self, my opinion, my experience. And I actually feel really incredibly lucky that this podcasting journey has like opened this up for me, because there might be a 45-year-old right now or a 52-year-old listening to this, and they're only realizing this stuff right now. And so I think about them in these types of conversations because like I'm really rooting for people that are older than me to actually get to this realization and realize that if they can become more vulnerable and show more of their true selves, then the rest of their outside world will actually start to reflect that back to them. And it's actually going to be an even more awesome journey to live the rest of your life, being completely free, understanding yourself, having your own inner authority, having your own inner, value system. All of that comes from making yourself vulnerable. And I think that's so important because we need more vulnerable people, because as I said, that's going to lead to more real people. And the more real people we have, the better this society could become.
Yeah, so this is fascinating. It's 100%. So this is what happens. There's a phrase that goes around the alcohol, the addiction communities, of that trauma is the root of all addiction. And I get lots of people who are like, I had a pretty good childhood. Like nobody abused me. My parents loved me. They were there for me, all that kind of stuff. But I still became an alcoholic or an addict or whatever. What's up with that? Right. So here's the thing. There's two things we need that are essential as infants and children. We need attachment, and we know that. We all know that. And we need authenticity. And what happens is often we have to compromise our authenticity needs to meet our attachment needs in our family of origin. So for me, that was... I was a very, very typical British family where nobody showed emotion, talked about their feelings, was messy. And so I was taught, your feelings are not important, push them down, don't show them. And that was not authentic to me. I'm a very expressive person. So in order to keep my attachment, because as a child, you perceive it's conditional, even though it's typically not. but we perceive it's conditional. Like I won't, the best example for that, for example, is somebody who grows up in a family and they're gay and it wouldn't be accepted. So they know either in their family or perhaps in their communities or whatever, it wouldn't be acceptable to be gay or trans. So they have to hide that authentic piece of themselves in order to be connected and accepted and approved of by the people around them, because that is such a massive, huge human need. So when we become adults, and again, this is whether we have an alcohol problem or not, we have to start the journey back to our authentic selves.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that sense of attachment is kind of a life or death instinct when you're a kid. You're completely reliant on your parents for support,
survival,
stability, survival. Yeah. So it makes sense why kids are so, able to sacrifice that authentic part of themselves, because it seems like their whole life depends on doing that and maintaining that relationship with their parents, however dysfunctional it may look in retrospect when you're a kid, getting that pat on the head or just, acting in a way that prevents your parents from getting angry. It feels life or death.
Yeah. And you can see how that pattern continues in adulthood, and you can probably see it in people around you, where people sacrifice their authentic selves to be liked and approved of by their peer group and the culture that they're in as adults. That's why, problematic drinking behavior has been so accepted. Alcohol's inserted itself into so many different areas. The one that's very accepted is alcohol and sport. There's nothing about alcohol and sport that go together, but we have been conditioned to believe that those two things together. And we talked about the mummy needs wine. That's a whole nother, I see this a lot, like yoga studios, yoga and wine. These are not two things that go together, but we are making them go together. And we all we sign up for this because we want to be, it's a way of being accepted by the wider group, but then we are sacrificing parts of our authentic self.
And it's funny because it's like on the off chance that it actually gets the approval you're looking for. Like maybe it doesn't even matter to the other person that you're trying to appease. It's just do things for yourself. I mean, living for yourself is living like yourself and your authentic self is probably the easiest way of living. And I think that that's something we're all kind of figuring out as we get older. I love the flow of this conversation, Veronica. It's been awesome. One thing you'd mentioned just a few beats back was this idea of limiting beliefs, maybe like I'm not good enough or, I'm not loved. And some of that could come from ourselves. Some of that is from our parents. Some of that is just unprocessed feelings and emotions, all of the above. But I also feel like it's part of the fact that we lose our imagination as we get older. And I think it's really important that people stay curious, people tap back into their imagination. I think it's it's a different way of seeing the world, right? You can see the world in a different way and experience it in a different way through imagination. And so, I just think about all these different things. And even if you are a 45-year-old, I guess my question to you is, what's something as limiting yet as limitless as your imagination is?
Yeah, I love that. And that's all part of, I think, what happens when you return to your authentic self is that gets ignited. And that's all to do with the bandwidth, right? If you're sacrificing bandwidth on, worrying about alcohol, but it's also other stuff. It's the consequences of that. If you are sacrificing bandwidth, being a people pleaser or worrying what other people think about you, or all of that kind of stuff, that's all eating away at your bandwidth. So you don't have room for your imagination to be ignited.
So, Jay, I don't know if you have anything else, but.
No, I think it's been a really fascinating conversation. I think just realizing that it's not so much about the alcohol, but it's about what the alcohol is masking, that being the root of the problem, and then the root of the solution being not just quitting the alcohol, but letting your full self come to the fore, both in terms of the problem and the solution. Alcohol is really not the centerpiece. It's your personhood.
Yeah. And we could be, my book is really a personal development book. It's written for people who have an alcohol problem, but you can replace alcohol with food or vaping or screen time or over consuming. It's basically outside fixes to an inside problem.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the lasting message is similar to what was said earlier, just around getting back in touch with your real feelings and your real self, and bringing more of that to the world, because that's what the world needs. Last question for you, Veronica. I've been asking all of our guests this recently. If you could be any animal for a day, what would you be and why?
I would be my puppy dog. I had got a dog for the first time ever this year, and I like can't believe that I've lived my whole life never being a dog owner. Like, I love my dog so much, and I would come back as my puppy dog. He's a very special dog.
What's his name? What kind of dog is he?
It's a special breed. The breed is called Habibi Bear. The word Habibi means my beloved in Arabic, and they're therapy dogs. They're bred for, I think they're like schnoodles or something. They're a kind of form of schnoodle, but they're bred especially for like autistic kids or like therapeutic environments. So as a therapist, I really like the idea of getting a therapy dog. They're just love bugs, and he's called Cadbury, like the chocolate.
Cadbury.
Nice.
Oh, that's so
What
cute.
finally prompted you to get a dog after all these years?
We moved from New York to Tahoe, and my kids didn't want to leave New York. And the deal was, if we moved, we could get a dog.
Nice.
Amazing. Well, that's awesome. My heart is just full of warmth just now, just thinking about my own puppy. Yeah, no, seriously though, Veronica, thank you so much for your time, your insights, obviously the contribution to the world. And I hope people go subscribe to your podcast as well.
Thank you so much. Soberful, the Soberful podcast.
Soberful.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglatterly.com.
Thank you.